Eddie Van Halen walked into Ace Frehley's dressing room that August night in 1979, still riding the adrenaline high from Van Halen's opening set, and said the words that would end up haunting him for years. "You're good at what you do, but could you actually handle Van Halen material? Be honest." The question came out more confrontational than Eddie had intended, but once the words were spoken, there was no taking them back. Ace, sitting in front of a mirror removing his silver Space Ace makeup with methodical precision, didn't even look up from his reflection. Just kept wiping cold cream across his face, revealing pale skin beneath the cosmic design, and replied with a question that turned Eddie's challenge into something neither of them expected. "I don't know. Can I borrow your guitar and find out?" 30 minutes later, Eddie Van Halen was sitting on a road case with his jaw somewhere near the floor, frantically scribbling notes on a cocktail napkin while watching Ace Frehley play Eruption note perfect on the first attempt, then start adding variations and improvisations that somehow made Eddie's revolutionary piece sound even better than Eddie himself played it. Because what started as Eddie trying to put the makeup guy in his place, trying to demonstrate the superiority of pure musicianship over theatrical gimmickry, had just become the most educational and humbling night of his young career. The Oakland Coliseum on August 1979 was packed with 18,000 people there to see what was shaping up to be one of the year's most successful tours, Van Halen opening for KISS. Two bands representing completely opposite philosophies about what rock music should be, what a guitarist should do, what success looked like. KISS was the established theatrical empire, four guys in monster makeup selling out arenas with a show that was equal parts concert and Broadway spectacle. Pyrotechnics, blood-spitting, fire-breathing, platform boots, Gene flying on cables, explosions timed to the downbeats. Van Halen was the new phenomenon, four regular-looking guys with no gimmicks who happened to play their instruments at a level that was rewriting the rules about what was technically possible on stage. Eddie Van Halen, at 24 years old, was already being called the greatest guitarist of his generation by people who actually knew what they were talking about. His self-titled debut album from the previous year had introduced the world to Eruption, 90 seconds of guitar solo that featured his perfected two-handed tapping technique. The technique itself wasn't entirely new. Other guitarists had dabbled with the concept over the years, but Eddie had refined it, popularized it, made it the new standard by which technical guitar playing would be judged for the next several decades. And the praise had been so consistent, so overwhelming, that Eddie was starting to believe he really might be as revolutionary as everyone kept saying. Van Halen had opened that night and absolutely destroyed. Eddie's performance had been flawless, his solos blazing, his stage presence confident and commanding. The crowd had responded enthusiastically, giving them exactly the kind of reception any opening band would dream about. But then, KISS took the stage, and something fundamentally different happened. The energy didn't just increase, it exploded into something almost violent in its intensity. The crowd went from excited to absolutely insane. The pyro explosions, the blood, the fire, Gene's 7-inch platform boots making him look like a monster, Paul working every corner of the stage, the entire production transforming a rock concert into something closer to a religious experience designed by people on heavy drugs. And Eddie, watching from the wings, felt that old familiar resentment starting to build. His band was better. Musically, technically, Van Halen was objectively superior. They could play circles around KISS when it came to pure musicianship. Yet, KISS was getting a reaction from the crowd that Van Halen hadn't generated, and Eddie knew exactly why. It was the theatrics, the makeup, the spectacle. People were responding to the show more than the music. And while Eddie understood intellectually that KISS was giving the audience a complete sensory experience rather than just a musical one, part of him couldn't help but resent that technical excellence was being overshadowed by guys in costumes shooting rockets from their guitars. After KISS finished their set, Eddie found himself wandering the backstage corridors. He'd wanted to meet Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley for business reasons, to pick their brains about the merchandising empire they'd built, the way they'd turned a rock band into a commercial juggernaut. But as he walked past the dressing rooms, something made him stop. Guitar playing, acoustic, Unplugged, just someone messing around in that unconscious way musicians do when they're coming down from the adrenaline high of a performance. Eddie followed the sound to a half-open door and looked inside. Ace Frehley sat in front of a makeup mirror, still wearing his silver and black spaceman costume, but with half the makeup removed, so his face looked bizarrely split between cosmic character and regular human. He was playing an acoustic guitar, working through some bluesy chord progressions. Nothing fancy, nothing showy, just feeling the music. Eddie knocked on the doorframe. Ace looked up, set the guitar aside. "Hey, you're Eddie from Van Halen, right?" His Bronx accent was thick, completely at odds with the alien costume he was still wearing. "Yeah, hell of a show you guys put on out there." "Thanks, man. Caught your set from back here. That Eruption solo's incredible. The tapping thing you do, it's revolutionary." Eddie smiled, the compliment landing exactly where compliments always landed with Eddie. "Thanks. It's just technique, though. Two-handed tapping. Been working on it for years." "Shows," Ace said, going back to removing his makeup. "Must take serious dedication." "It does." Eddie paused, then added, maybe because he was still running on adrenaline, maybe because of that lingering resentment about the crowd's reaction. "It's real playing, though, not just showmanship." Ace stopped wiping his face. His eyes found Eddie's in the mirror. "What do you mean by that?" Eddie immediately knew he'd crossed a line, but his ego pushed him forward anyway. "No offense. KISS is great at what you do, the theater, the spectacle. But musically, it's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, you guys are good at what you do, but could you actually handle Van Halen material? Be honest." The dressing room went very quiet. You could hear the ventilation system humming, someone laughing in a distant hallway, the muffled sound of crew breaking down equipment on stage. Ace slowly set down his towel, turned his chair to face Eddie directly. "I don't know," he said, his voice calm, but with something sharp underneath. "Can I borrow your guitar and find out?" Eddie's confidence flickered for just a second. "You want to try playing Van Halen?" "Why not? You just said it's all about technique. So let's see if the circus clown can handle the real music. That's what you're implying, right?" Eddie realized this conversation had escalated from casual backstage chat to something else entirely. But he'd started it, and backing down now would be worse than whatever was about to happen. "Okay, my guitar's in our dressing room. Come on." The walk down the hallway was silent and tense. Roadies and crew members saw them walking together, sensed something brewing. Word spread fast. By the time they reached Van Halen's dressing room, there was a small crowd following them, including David Lee Roth, who had a supernatural ability to appear whenever drama was about to unfold. "What's happening here?" Roth asked, theatrical as always. "Ace wants to try playing some Van Halen," Eddie said, pulling his guitar from its case. "The Frankenstein," his custom-built red, white, and black-striped masterpiece that was already becoming iconic. "This should be entertaining," Roth said, grinning. Not mean, just genuinely curious. Eddie handed the guitar to Ace. Ace took it, tested the weight, checked the neck. The action was completely different from his Les Pauls. The pickup configuration was Eddie's custom work, but Ace had been playing guitar since he was 13. He knew how to adjust. "What do you want me to play?" Ace asked. "Your choice," Eddie said, sitting on a road case. "Play whatever proves your point." Ace thought for a moment. He could play something safe, something in his comfort zone. But that would prove nothing. If he was doing this, he needed to go straight at Eddie's ego. "How about Eruption?" The room went dead silent. Eruption wasn't just a song. It was Eddie's manifesto. His announcement to the world that he'd arrived. Attempting it was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. "You know Eruption?" Eddie asked, skeptical. "I've heard it, a lot. It's all over the radio. The tapping part's pretty recognizable." "Knowing a song and playing it are different things." "Guess we'll find out." Ace plugged the Frankenstein into a small practice amp. The tone wasn't perfect, but it was enough. He positioned his fingers, took a breath, started playing. The opening to Eruption is deceptively simple. Tremolo picking that builds tension before exploding into complexity. Ace played it clean, his fingers finding the notes with surprising accuracy for someone playing it for the first time on a completely unfamiliar guitar. Eddie leaned forward despite himself, his initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest. Then Ace hit the tapping section. The part that had made Eddie famous, the technique that was on every guitar magazine cover, the innovation that every young guitarist in America was trying to master in their bedroom. Right hand hammering onto the fretboard instead of picking, creating that cascading waterfall effect that sounded like an instrument that shouldn't exist. Eddie's signature, his revolution, the technique he'd spent years perfecting in secret before revealing it to the world. And Ace nailed it. Not perfectly. Eddie noticed a couple timing issues, a few notes that weren't completely clean. But he got the core of it, understood the fundamental mechanics and the musicality. The technique was there. The understanding was there. This wasn't someone faking their way through by luck. This was real playing, real musicianship being demonstrated by someone Eddie had just dismissed as a theatrical prop. Eddie's expression shifted from skeptical to surprised to something approaching respect. The others in the room stayed silent, understanding they were witnessing something significant. Ace played through the entire piece, 90 seconds of technically demanding work. When he finished, he let the final note ring out, then looked at Eddie. Not bad, right? For a circus performer. Eddie stood slowly. That was really good. How did you learn that so fast? I didn't learn it fast. I've been playing guitar 15 years. You think I haven't been paying attention to what you're doing? You think because I wear makeup I don't study technique? He handed the guitar back. You're not the first person to invent tapping. You're just the one who made it popular. The technique's been around. I've been working with it for years. I just don't showcase it the way you do because that's not what KISS is about. Eddie looked at his guitar, then at Ace. I underestimated you. I apologize. You want to know the real difference between us? Ace asked. It's not technical skill. We're both good. The difference is philosophy. You believe guitar playing is about demonstrating technical mastery. I believe it's about serving the song. Neither of us is wrong. We're just different. David Lee Roth started clapping slowly. That was beautiful. A guitar summit. Someone should have recorded this. Eddie was still processing. Can I ask you something? Why don't you showcase more technical ability in KISS songs? Why not display what you can actually do? I'm not hiding it, Ace said. I'm using it appropriately. Every solo I play in KISS serves the song. It's not about showing off. It's about making the song better. Could I shred all over every track? Sure. But why? That's not what the song needs. Doesn't that frustrate you? Eddie asked, genuinely curious now. Having ability you don't fully display? Ace thought about this. No. Because I get to make millions of people happy. I get to be part of something bigger than my guitar playing. KISS isn't about me showing everyone how good I am. It's about creating an experience. The makeup, the fire, the show, that's not compensation for lack of skill. It's enhancement of skill in service of entertainment. Eddie sat back down. His entire demeanor changed. I've been looking at this all wrong. You think? Ace said, but he was smiling. The tension had broken. My turn, Eddie said. You played my song. I want to try playing like you. Show me something from KISS. Teach me a solo. Ace looked surprised. You want to learn KISS? Yeah, show me Shock Me. That's your song, right? For the next 30 minutes, the two guitarists sat together, Eddie's Frankenstein passing back and forth, each teaching the other, each learning not just techniques but philosophies. Ace showed Eddie how he approached melody, building solos around emotion first, technique second. Eddie showed Ace his modifications, the specific tweaks he'd made to achieve his unique sounds. The crowd that had gathered expecting a confrontation witnessed a masterclass instead. Two completely different approaches to the same instrument, both valid, both powerful, both serving different purposes. Paul Stanley walked in at some point, saw what was happening, smiled. He'd always known Ace could do this. The world underestimated Ace because of the makeup, but Paul knew the truth. Ace Frehley was one of the most talented guitarists in rock. He just chose to be part of something larger than his ego. Eventually, their session wound down. Eddie and Ace were both sweating, both grinning, both having experienced something unexpected and valuable. You know what I learned tonight? Eddie said. I learned I was being a snob. I thought because Van Halen is about virtuosity and KISS is about theater, that meant we were more legitimate. But you guys are legitimate too, just differently. And I learned I need to push myself more technically, Ace said. You made me realize I've gotten comfortable. I can do more, should do more. Maybe not in KISS, but in my own playing. They shook hands, but it felt like more than a handshake. It felt like mutual recognition, two masters in different disciplines acknowledging each other. We should do this again, Eddie said. Get together, just play, learn from each other. I'd like that, Ace agreed. They did get together again several times over the years, sometimes to jam, sometimes to work on ideas, sometimes just to talk about guitars and life and music. They became real friends, built on that night in Oakland when confrontation became collaboration. Years later, in a 1996 interview, Eddie Van Halen was asked about guitarists he respected. His answer surprised the interviewer. Ace Frehley is massively underrated. People see the makeup and think it's a gimmick, but Ace can play, really play. He's got technique, he's got feel, he's got everything. I learned that the hard way when I challenged him, and he proceeded to play my own song back at me. It was humbling and educational. Ace taught me there's more than one way to be a great guitarist. Ace, characteristically modest when asked about the same encounter, said simply, Eddie and I jammed one night. It was fun. He's incredible, changed guitar playing. I learned a lot from him. But I think maybe he learned that the KISS guys aren't just clowns in makeup. We can actually play our instruments. The story became legendary in guitar circles. Different versions emerged over the years, some exaggerated, some simplified. But the core remained true. Two guitarists from different worlds met, challenged each other, walked away with greater respect. The incident changed how some people viewed KISS. The narrative had always been more show than substance. But when Eddie Van Halen, the guitar prodigy who revolutionized the instrument, publicly stated his respect for Ace Frehley's abilities, it forced reconsideration. Maybe KISS was both spectacle and substance. Maybe the two weren't mutually exclusive. For Ace, the encounter reinforced something he'd always believed, but sometimes doubted during harsh criticism. He was a real guitarist, not just a guy in makeup. A real musician with real abilities who'd chosen to apply those abilities in service of entertainment rather than pure technical exhibition. And there was nothing wrong with that choice. For Eddie, it was a reminder about assumptions and ego. He had walked into that dressing room confident in his superiority, certain that theatrical bands were lesser. He walked out understanding that superiority is a false concept. There are only different approaches, different philosophies, different ways of connecting with audiences, none inherently better. The practice amp they used that night became a piece of rock history. The road case Eddie sat on while watching Ace play was later marked with a Sharpie by someone who'd been there. Eddie met his match August 79th. In decades that followed, whenever young guitarists debated technical virtuosity versus emotional playing, older musicians who knew the story would bring up that night in Oakland. The night Eddie Van Halen learned not to judge a guitarist by his costume. The night Ace Frehley proved spectacle and substance weren't opposing forces. The night two legends challenged each other and both came away better. Sometimes the best education comes from being wrong. And sometimes the best friendships start with someone proving you misjudged them. Eddie Van Halen and Ace Frehley both learned that lesson in a cramped dressing room in Oakland, surrounded by equipment and egos and eventually mutual respect. The last time they saw each other, years before Eddie's death in 2020, Ace reminded Eddie of that night. Remember when you asked if I could handle Van Halen material? Eddie laughed. I was such an arrogant kid. You should have punched me. Nah, Ace said. I did something better. I played your guitar and made you rethink everything. You did, Eddie agreed, and I'm grateful for it. You made me a better musician and a better person. Same, Ace said. You pushed me to not settle, to keep challenging myself. That was the real legacy of that night. Not just a cool story about two guitar heroes meeting, but a genuine exchange of ideas, a mutual elevation, a moment when competition gave way to collaboration and ego gave way to respect. In a business full of confrontations and rivalries, it stood out as something rarer, something that reminded everyone involved that music at its best is about connection, not competition. This story is based on documented accounts from the 1979 Van Halen KISS tour. Conversations have been dramatized while staying true to what actually happened. This narrative was created with AI assistance to bring these historical moments to life. If this story moved you, if you've ever learned that different doesn't mean inferior, if you've ever had your assumptions challenged and come away better for it, share this. Tell your story in the comments. Subscribe for more stories about the moments when legends learn from legends, when ego gives way to wisdom, when mutual respect transcends competition.